The distress signal. The universe had a way of testing species at their most vulnerable moments. For the Salvorans, that moment came on what should have been a day of celebration. Their colony ship, Hope's Journey, drifted through the Proxima sector carrying 10,000 souls toward their new home. Families pressed against observation windows, watching stars drift by like scattered diamonds. Children laughed in the recreational areas while their parents prepared for a new life on a distant world. Commander Vela stood on the bridge, her forearms moving gracefully across control panels as she monitored their course. The Salvorans were not warriors. Evolution on their peaceful world had gifted them with advanced mathematics, beautiful music, and an understanding of quantum mechanics that most species took centuries longer to achieve. They had never needed weapons because they had never known war. Until today. The first impact shook the entire vessel. Alarms screamed through corridors as emergency lights bathed everything in amber. Vela's primary eyes widened as she read the sensor data. 3 ships had dropped from hyperspace, their hulls bristling with weapons that looked designed for only one purpose: destruction. Kraken Empire vessels, her navigation officer whispered, terror making his voice shake. Everyone knew about the Krakens. They conquered worlds not for resources or territory, but for the simple pleasure of dominance. Their home planet had forged them into creatures of pure aggression, tentacled monsters that viewed mercy as weakness. Send distress signals on all frequencies, Vela commanded, though she knew it was likely futile. The Proxima sector was remote, chosen specifically because it was far from established trade routes. No one would hear them in time. The second impact tore through their shields like paper. Vela watched helplessly as one of their engine pods exploded, sending the colony ship into a slow spin. Through the chaos, she heard something that made her hearts freeze, children crying in the lower decks. 10,000 civilians, including 3,000 younglings, were about to become victims of the galaxy's most ruthless empire. Please, Vela spoke into the communication system, broadcasting on every frequency she knew. This is the Salvoran colony ship Hope's Journey. We are under attack. We have families aboard, children. If anyone can hear this, please help us. The message rippled out through space, a desperate cry in the darkness. It passed through empty void, bounced off dead planets, and finally, after traveling for precious minutes that felt like hours, reached a small monitoring station on the edge of human space. Specialist James Chen nearly dropped his coffee when the signal came through. He had been manning the remote listening post for 6 months, mostly tracking asteroid movements and cataloging stellar phenomena. Distress calls were rare this far out. He ran the message through translators, and when the words appeared on his screen, his blood ran cold. Children under attack, families in danger. Without hesitation, Chen opened a priority channel to Earth Command. The message he sent would change the course of galactic history. Admiral, we have civilians under Kraken attack in Proxima. They have kids on board. Admiral Sarah Washington read the report 3 times in 60 seconds. She had commanded Earth's 3rd Fleet for 5 years, earning respect through careful diplomacy and measured responses. But there were certain lines that, once crossed, demanded immediate action. Attacking civilians was one. Attacking children was unforgivable. How many ships can we get to Proxima? She asked her aide. The 7th Squadron is closest, 6 hours out, but Admiral, that's only 12 ships against a Kraken raiding party. Washington stood from her desk, her decision already made. Send the alert to all sectors. Priority 1. Any ship that can reach Proxima is authorized to respond. All sectors, Admiral. That could pull ships from all sectors, Lieutenant. The galaxy needs to learn that humans protect those who cannot protect themselves. The alert spread through human space like wildfire. On Mars, Captain Jennifer Park was conducting routine maintenance on her battlecruiser when the message arrived. She read it once, then turned to her crew. Drop everything. We have children in danger. On the mining station orbiting Jupiter, a group of retired military pilots looked at each other as the alert came through their civilian channels. Without a word, they began preparing their old fighters for one more flight. The response was not coordinated by any central command. It was something deeper, something written into human DNA through millions of years of evolution. Humans had survived their death world by protecting their young, by standing together against predators, by refusing to abandon those in need. Captain Maria Rodriguez commanded the exploration vessel New Horizon, a ship designed for science, not war. She was cataloging minerals in an asteroid field when Chen's distress signal reached her. Her crew was small, only 50 souls, and their weapons were basic. But as she read about children under attack, she thought of her own daughter back on Earth. Navigation, plot a course for Proxima Sector, she ordered. Captain, we're not equipped for combat against Krakens, her first officer warned. Rodriguez turned to face her bridge crew. There are 3,000 children on that colony ship. If we don't try to help them, who will? The military will respond. In 6 hours. How many children die in 6 hours? Rodriguez's voice carried the steel that had helped humans survive ice ages, predators, and countless disasters. "We're going. Send word to any other ships in range. Tell them the children need us." The phenomenon that followed would be studied by xenobiologists for generations. Humans, scattered across a dozen systems, began moving toward a single point. Not because they were ordered to, but because something fundamental in their nature demanded it. Merchant vessels changed course. Private security companies volunteered their services. Even a cruise ship full of tourists requested coordinates to help with evacuation if needed. Back on the Hope's journey, Commander Vela watched their shields fail completely. The Kraken commander appeared on their communication screen, a massive creature with dozens of writhing tentacles and eyes that held nothing but cruel amusement. "Salvarin vessel," the Kraken spoke, his translator turning growls into words. "You will surrender your ship. Your people will serve the Empire. Resistance will result in—" A burst of static cut through his threat. Then, a new voice emerged, speaking an accented galactic standard but carrying unmistakable determination. "Kraken vessel, this is Captain Rodriguez of the human ship New Horizon. You are engaged in an act of war against civilians. Withdraw immediately." The Kraken commander's tentacles writhed in what might have been laughter. "One small human ship challenges the might of the Empire? You Deathworlders have more courage than sense." "Check your long-range sensors," Rodriguez replied calmly. The Kraken turned to his sensor operator, who was already working frantically at his station. The creature's color changed from deep purple to pale gray as he read the data. "Commander, I'm detecting multiple hyperspace signatures approaching. Dozens. No, hundreds of vessels." On the Hope's journey, Vela watched her tactical display in amazement as ship after ship dropped from hyperspace. They came in every size and configuration: massive battleships, small fighters, converted cargo haulers, private yachts with hastily mounted weapons. The identification codes showed they were all human, but they represented no single fleet or organization. They were simply humans who had heard children were in danger. Admiral Washington's voice cut through all communication channels. "Kraken vessels, you are now facing over 300 human ships. We offer you one opportunity to withdraw. You have 30 seconds to comply." The Kraken commander's tentacles had gone completely still. His species had conquered through fear and overwhelming force. They had never faced an entire species responding to protect strangers. In their philosophy, no one risked themselves for others without gain. Yet here were hundreds of human ships, many of them civilian, ready to fight and die for aliens they had never met. As the seconds ticked down, more ships continued to arrive. The human response was not just military might, it was a statement about who they were as a species. They were the children of Earth, a world that had tried to kill them every day for millions of years. They had survived by protecting each other, by refusing to abandon the vulnerable, by standing together against any threat. The 30 seconds expired. The Kraken commander had to make a choice that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. The gathering storm. The silence in space lasted exactly 3 seconds after Admiral Washington's deadline expired. Then the Kraken commander made the worst decision of his life. His tactical officer had counted over 300 human vessels and warned that more were still arriving. His weapons officer had analyzed their offensive capabilities and concluded that while many were civilian ships, even those had been modified with surprising effectiveness. His communications officer had intercepted chatter between the human vessels, noting their coordination despite being from different fleets, different sectors, even different social classes. But the Kraken commander had risen through the ranks of his empire by never showing weakness. To retreat now would mean disgrace, possibly execution. The empire had built its reputation on inevitable victory. No one defied the Krakens and lived to spread the tale. "All weapons, target the human vessels," he ordered, his tentacles darkening with resolve. "Begin with their lead ship." It was like poking a sleeping dragon. The moment Kraken weapons powered up, every human ship responded in perfect synchronization despite having no central command structure. It was as if 300 individual minds suddenly became one collective consciousness focused on a single goal: protect the innocent. Captain Rodriguez aboard the New Horizon had expected this. Humans had studied Kraken psychology enough to know they would not retreat easily. She had also studied human history enough to know what her species was capable of when pushed. "All civilian vessels form protective barrier around the colony ship," she commanded on the shared frequency. "Military vessels, engage at will." What happened next defied every military doctrine the galaxy had ever seen. Civilian cargo haulers moved into defensive positions without hesitation, their captains knowing they were making themselves targets. Private yachts linked their shields together, creating barriers that individually were weak but collectively could withstand significant punishment. Mining vessels deployed their industrial equipment as improvised weapons, their operators applying skills learned breaking asteroids to the task of war. Lieutenant Commander Zhang aboard the destroyer Thunderstrike watched this display with awe. He had served in the human military for 15 years, trained with the finest officers Earth could produce. Yet here were civilians, accountants and teachers and traders, maneuvering their ships with the precision of veteran combat pilots. "Sir," his weapons officer reported, "the cruise ship Stellar Dream is requesting targeting data. They've converted their entertainment lasers into weapons." Zhang smiled grimly. This was humanity at its most dangerous, creative, adaptable, and absolutely unified when protecting those who could not protect themselves. The first exchange of fire lit up the Proxima sector like a deadly fireworks display. Kraken plasma cannons designed to tear through hull armor met human interceptor missiles that shouldn't have existed on civilian vessels. Human railguns, some clearly improvised from mining equipment, returned fire with accuracy that spoke of desperate determination rather than military training. On the Hope's journey, Commander Vela watched the battle unfold with disbelief. The Salvarans had always viewed humans with a mixture of respect and fear. They came from a world where the gravity would crush most species, where the weather could kill in minutes, where even the smallest creatures carried deadly venom. But now she was seeing something beyond physical toughness. She was seeing a species that had evolved to protect its vulnerable at any cost. "Commander," her communications officer called out, "I'm receiving a transmission from the human fleet." Admiral Washington's face appeared on their screen, calm despite the battle raging around her flagship. "Commander Vela, we're going to get you out of there. Can your ship still maneuver?" "Barely, Admiral. Our engines are heavily damaged." "Understood. We're sending repair crews to you now. Hold tight." Vela's third eye blinked in confusion. "Admiral, you're sending repair crews during a battle?" Washington smiled, an expression that somehow contained both warmth and deadly promise. "Commander, half our fleet are civilians who volunteered to help. They brought their tools along with their courage. Indeed, even as weapons fire crossed space in deadly patterns, small human vessels were already approaching the Hope's journey. These were not military craft, but private repair ships, their crews risking everything to help strangers. Vela watched a small maintenance pod dodge Kraken fire to reach their damaged engine sector, its pilot performing maneuvers that should have been impossible in such a vessel. The Kraken commander was learning a harsh lesson about human warfare. His people fought with overwhelming force and brutal efficiency. Humans fought with something else entirely. Adaptability born from surviving a world that changed its methods of killing with every season. When his heavy cruiser targeted a human battleship, 3 civilian vessels would coordinate electronic warfare attacks that shouldn't have been possible with civilian equipment. When his fighters pursued human bombers, private racing craft would appear from nowhere, their pilots using skills from entertainment to save lives. "Commander," his tactical officer reported with barely contained panic, "more human ships are still arriving. Count is now over 400. 400 ships. The Kraken commander had started this engagement outnumbered 100 to 1. Now it was worse, and the humans showed no signs of stopping. But what truly disturbed him was the communication traffic they were intercepting. These humans were not following orders from some central command. They were volunteers, talking to each other, coordinating through nothing more than shared purpose. He heard a grandmother on a transport ship directing missile defense for 3 combat vessels. A teenager on a racing craft was providing sensor data to military destroyers. Corporate executives were sharing their ship's shield frequencies to create overlapping defensive fields. It was chaos that somehow worked perfectly, like watching a school of fish turn as one to avoid a predator. Captain Park aboard the battlecruiser Mars Rising had engaged the largest Kraken vessel directly. Her ship was military, designed for exactly this kind of fight, but she was supported by a dozen civilian craft that had no business in a battle zone yet performed like veterans. "Captain," her sensor officer called out, "the colony ship's children are being moved to emergency shelters. The human repair crews are reporting they need 10 more minutes to get minimum engines online." "Then we give them 10 minutes, Park replied, her voice carrying across the bridge. "All ships increase defensive screen density. Nobody gets through to those children." The phrase echoed across the human fleet. Nobody gets through to those children. It became a battle cry, a promise, a line in space that the Krakens would not cross. Ships that were running low on ammunition positioned themselves as physical barriers. Pilots with damaged vessels refused to withdraw, using their last power reserves to maintain shield integrity. The Kraken commander watched his tactical advantage disappear entirely. His 3 warships were powerful, but they were designed to fight other warships, not an entire civilization responding to a threat. Every tactic he employed was countered not by military doctrine, but by human creativity. When he targeted the repair ships, racing craft would blind his sensors with reflected stellar radiation. When he tried to break through to the colony ship, cargo haulers would literally ram his fighters, their captains choosing certain death over allowing harm to come to children. "Commander," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the human admiral." Washington appeared on the screen again, but this time her expression had changed. The diplomacy was gone, replaced by something primal that made even the Kraken commander's aggressive species feel a chill of recognition. This was the face of an apex predator protecting its pack. "Kraken commander, I'm going to explain something about humans that your empire needs to understand. We evolved on a world that killed 90% of our offspring before they reached adulthood. Every human alive is descended from ancestors who did whatever was necessary to protect their children. That instinct doesn't stop at our own species." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "You have 2 choices. Withdraw now and spread the word that civilian targets are off limits, or continue fighting and learn why our world is classified as a death world, not because of what it did to us, but because of what it made us into." The Kraken commander looked at his tactical display. 417 human ships now surrounded his 3 vessels. His weapons were depleted by 40%. His shields were failing on multiple sections, but more importantly, he had seen something that challenged everything the Kraken Empire believed about power. These humans were not fighting for conquest or resources or even revenge. They were fighting for strangers, for children they had never met, for principles that the Kraken philosophy said made species weak. Yet here they were, overwhelming his forces through sheer determination to protect the innocent. As more hyperspace signatures appeared on his sensors, indicating even more human ships arriving, the Kraken commander realized he was not just losing a battle. He was witnessing the emergence of something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that would mobilize its entire civilization to protect those who could not protect themselves. Thunder from the Death World. The Kraken commander had seconds to make his decision as the human fleet continued to grow around him. His pride demanded he fight to the death, but something deeper, a survival instinct that transcended even Kraken aggression, recognized what he was truly facing. This was not a military force following orders. This was an entire species responding to a primal call, and that made them infinitely more dangerous than any organized navy. "All ships," he growled into his communication system, his tentacles pale with what his crew would later swear was not fear, but strategic wisdom. "Cease fire and prepare for withdrawal." His weapons officer turned in shock. "Commander, the Empire does not retreat from—" "The Empire has never faced this." The commander cut him off, gesturing at the tactical display showing over 400 human vessels. "Look at them. Military ships fighting alongside merchant vessels. Children in racing craft providing combat support. Elderly humans in obsolete freighters positioning themselves as shields. This is not war as we understand it. This is something else." On the new horizon, Captain Rodriguez watched the Kraken weapons power down with relief mixed with sustained vigilance. "All ships, maintain defensive positions. Let them go, but stay ready." The human fleet parted like a living organism, creating a corridor for the Kraken vessels to retreat while keeping weapons locked on them. It was a message clearer than any words. Leave now, and never come back. As the Kraken ships began their withdrawal, emergency vessels swarmed the Hope's journey. The contrast was striking. Moments ago, these same ships had been ready for battle. Now, human repair crews worked alongside Salvaran engineers, sharing technology and expertise without hesitation. Medical vessels docked with the colony ship, their doctors and nurses rushing to treat wounded civilians. Dr. Elizabeth Chara, a civilian physician who had been on vacation when the alert went out, found herself treating Salvaran children in the colony ship's damaged medical bay. She had commandeered a yacht, convinced its owner to install medical equipment, and flown into a war zone because the thought of injured children light years from help was unbearable. "How many wounded?" she asked the Salvaran medical officer, her translator converting the musical Salvaran language into words she could understand. 47 injuries, 12 critical, but doctor, we don't have the equipment to—" "You do now," Chara interrupted, gesturing to the human medical teams pouring in with supplies. "We brought everything. Nobody dies today." Commander Vela moved through her ship, watching humans and Salvarans working side by side. A human engineer was teaching her crew how to modify shields using techniques developed on Earth to deal with solar radiation that would kill most species. A human pilot was sharing navigation data that would help them avoid future pirate routes. Everywhere she looked, she saw humans giving freely of their knowledge, their resources, their time. Commander Vela, Admiral Washington's voice came through her personal communicator. I'd like to speak with you directly if you're able. Vela made her way to an intact conference room where Washington's image appeared on the main screen. The human admiral looked tired but satisfied, like a predator that had successfully defended its territory. Admiral, I don't know how to thank you. Your people saved 10,000 lives today. Washington shook her head. No thanks necessary, Commander. Can I ask you something? Your distress signal mentioned you had children aboard. Was that intentional? Vela's four arms gestured in the Salvoran equivalent of confusion. Intentional? I simply stated facts. We had 3,000 younglings aboard. That fact mobilized our entire species, Washington explained. You need to understand something about humans. We're physically strong because our world made us that way. But we're psychologically unified because protecting the vulnerable, especially children, is hard-coded into our DNA. When your message mentioned children in danger, every human who heard it felt personally responsible for protecting them. Even though they weren't your children? Even though we're not your species? Washington smiled. Commander, every child is everyone's responsibility. That's how humanity survived. The child you protect today might discover the cure for the disease that would have killed your grandchildren tomorrow. The stranger you save might be the one who pulls your family from a burning building next year. We survived our death world by understanding that individual strength means nothing without collective protection. The Krakens will return, Vela said quietly. They don't forgive challenges to their authority. Let them come, Washington replied, and something in her voice made Vela understand why humans were classified as Deathworlders. What happened today is already spreading through quantum communication networks. Every human in the galaxy knows that civilians were threatened, and we responded. If the Krakens want to escalate, they'll discover that today's response was restrained. Restrained? You mobilized over 400 ships. Commander, there are 12 billion humans spread across 40 systems. What you saw today was roughly 1% of our civilian fleet choosing to respond. 1%. And they arrived within hours. Washington let that sink in. If the Krakens formally threaten civilian populations, they won't face hundreds of human ships. They'll face thousands, maybe tens of thousands, not because any government orders it, but because that's who we are. The implications sent ripples through Vela's consciousness. The galaxy had always feared human military might, but they had misunderstood the true danger. It wasn't human weapons or tactics that made them formidable. It was their instinct to protect, amplified by technology and organized by principles that transcended government or law. Over the next several hours, as repairs continued and the wounded were treated, something unprecedented began happening. Other species' ships started arriving. First, a Zilani medical vessel appeared, its captain explaining they had heard about the human response and wanted to help. Then, a Korthan supply ship arrived with emergency provisions. Within 12 hours, representatives from 20 different species had come to offer assistance. Captain Rodriguez found herself in an impromptu conference with captains from a dozen species. The Zilani captain, a crystalline being whose species had always remained neutral in galactic conflicts, spoke first. Captain Rodriguez, what we witnessed today challenges everything we believed about power and protection. Your species responded not with conquest in mind, but with genuine protective instinct. That's what confused the Krakens, Rodriguez replied. They understand taking territory, claiming resources, dominating others. They don't understand protecting strangers because it's right. Will humanity extend such protection to others? Asked the Korthan captain, his scaled hide shifting colors with emotion. Rodriguez looked around the room at the various species represented. That's not my decision to make officially, but I can tell you that every human child learns the same lesson. The strong protect the weak, not because the weak will repay them, but because that's what makes civilization possible. The conversations continued for hours, and by the time they concluded, the framework for something unprecedented had been established. Not a military alliance or trade agreement, but something simpler and more profound. A mutual understanding that civilians, especially children, were off limits in any conflict. The Salvoran colony ship, now repaired enough to continue its journey, prepared for departure. Commander Vela stood in her bridge, watching the human fleet that still maintained protective positions around them. Many ships were damaged from the battle, their hulls scarred by weapons fire, yet none had withdrawn. Admiral Washington, Vela spoke over the communication channel, the Salvoran people will never forget this. How can we repay such kindness? You already have, Washington replied. You sent a distress signal. You trusted that someone would answer. That trust is what makes civilization possible. Pass it forward, Commander. When you hear someone calling for help, remember today. As the Hope's journey engaged its repaired engines and continued toward its destination, it was escorted by over 100 human vessels that had volunteered to ensure its safe arrival. The sight was broadcast across the galaxy, a peaceful colony ship surrounded by protectors who asked nothing in return except the promise that such protection would be extended to others in need. The Kraken commander's report to his empire would change their entire military doctrine. He spoke of humans who turned mining lasers into weapons, who used racing craft as fighters, who positioned themselves as living shields for strangers. But most importantly, he spoke of a species that could not be conquered through fear because they feared nothing more than failing to protect the innocent. They don't fight for glory or resources, he told the Kraken High Command. They fight for principles that make no evolutionary sense yet somehow made them the apex predators of a death world. Avoid civilian targets. The humans' restraint today was a warning, not weakness. Within one galactic standard year, the Proxima Doctrine would be signed by 43 species, establishing universal protection for civilian vessels and populations. It was not enforced by any government or military, but by the understanding that humans would respond to violations with the same overwhelming protective instinct they had shown at Proxima. Captain Rodriguez returned to her exploration mission, her small ship bearing new scars from the battle. Her crew had volunteered for a scientific mission and found themselves in the largest civilian military action in human history. As they cataloged asteroids and studied stellar phenomena, they carried with them the knowledge that they had been part of something greater. "Captain," her first officer asked during a quiet moment, "do you think other species understand what really happened at Proxima?" Rodriguez looked out at the stars, thinking of the children aboard the Hope's journey who would grow up free because strangers had risked everything to protect them. "They understand enough," she said. "They understand that humans will come when called. That might be the most important message we've ever sent to the galaxy." The battle at Proxima had lasted less than 4 hours. The response had mobilized less than 1% of humanity's civilian population. Yet it had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy, not through conquest or intimidation, but through a simple demonstration of what happened when humanity's protective instincts were triggered. Earth's children had answered the call, and the galaxy would never be the same. Years later, when historians tried to pinpoint the moment humanity became the unofficial protectors of galactic civilization, they would point to Proxima, not because of the battle itself, but because of what it represented. The moment the galaxy learned that humans' greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their death world origin, but their absolute refusal to abandon those in need. The Salvaran children who had cowered in fear during the attack would grow up to become some of the strongest advocates for human integration into galactic society. They had been saved not by a military force or political alliance, but by ordinary humans who had heard their cry for help and responded with extraordinary courage. And in the vast darkness between stars, that message continued to spread. When the innocent are threatened, when children cry for help, when the vulnerable face the cruel, Earth's children will answer. They will come in their hundreds or their thousands, in military vessels or converted yachts, trained soldiers or suburban teachers, but they will come. Because that's what humans do. They protect, they stand together, they answer the call. The galaxy had learned to fear the Deathworlders. At Proxima, they learned to trust them, and that trust would shape the next 1,000 years of galactic civilization, built on the foundation of a simple truth. When you call for help, humans will answer.